So last week I made a joke with Mike Fitz that if I lost my voice, he would have to come preach. And God saw fit that I would lose my voice Monday through Wednesday. So, but I'm grateful that I woke up on Thursday with a voice and woke up this morning with a voice. And so I'm going to use it as much as I can. I might be a little bit softer spoken in case it starts to waver, but many of you were praying for me, and I appreciate that this week. I'm going to start in a way that I don't usually start because I saw one of my friends on Facebook posted a comic a few weeks ago, and as I was preparing for this sermon, I kept thinking about that comic. It's a Calvin and Hobbes comic. Can we put it up on the slide, on the screen here? So this is what, if you can't see, I'm going to say it for you. She says to the husband, "Any good mail today?" He says, "Not really. Here's a, you're not covering the cost of these mailings charity request. You got a not attractive enough women's magazine with an article on swimsuits that minimize all your body flaws. Here are some you're not stylish or ostentatious enough catalogs, and coincidentally an invitation to go deeper in debt from a credit card company. And here's our news magazine to identify the trend of the week we're missing, and I got a hobby magazine featuring new equipment I ought to have. Yikes. Why do I get the feeling that society is trying to make us discontented with everything we do and insecure about who we are?" She says, "I suppose people thought about real issues and needs instead of manufactured desires. The economy would collapse and we'd have total anarchy. So he then says, so pitching this junk would make me some kind of terrorist, huh?" She says, "Yep, it's our patriotic duty to buy distractions from a simple life." And Calvin comes in at the end, "Hey, Mom, I saw a bunch of products on TV I didn't know existed, but I desperately need." And it's one of those things that as advertising just sort of slips into every area of our life. Like I don't think it's coincidence, right? That things that I check on my browser or things that are happening in our life, like I've never posted anything online, so my wife's expecting if you did not know that. Aside from a video of me hitting a golf ball that exploded in blue powder, we haven't put anything online about her being pregnant. But she's not on social media, and I'm getting all these ads for maternity clothes. No. Right? And what the basic premise of advertising is we're going to create a feeling of jealousy, of envy, of wanting, and then offering something to fulfill it. Right? That's the reason our economy exists the way it does. Now, I'm not trying to make a point about the economic structure of our country. In fact, I would say the brilliance of the economy that we currently have is that it knows about our nature. And that is that in our nature, in our human condition, in the brokenness of sin, we constantly look for other things to give us fulfillment. We constantly look with jealousy and envy at other things. And what the economy does and what consumerism does, it says these things will make you feel fulfilled. They will help you look better. They will help you feel better. They will make you feel more powerful. And that's what the Calvin and Hobbes comic tries to do. It pokes fun at the fact that in our fallen condition, anytime we see something that we want, we think we deserve it. That we deserve it more than the other person. That if that person is driving that car, then maybe I should go upgrade my car. Or if that person posts on social media that really cool picture, maybe I need to go to a photography class and start learning so I can have just as cool of an Instagram feed. In our fallen condition, the truth is we are jealous, we are envious, we are selfish, thinking that we deserve what others have. And all the world does is it offers things to fulfill that need. And the crazy thing is, they find all sorts of needs that we don't even know we knew about yet. Right? That's the Calvin part of it. I didn't know I needed all these products, but I do now. Right? You've been searching on Amazon, you stumble across something, you're like, I didn't know I needed that, but now I do. That's all I can think about. I'm going to put it on my wish list. Right? That is the way our mind works. And what we're going to see today is it's not a new thing. It doesn't matter how much power or how much position or how much money you have, that nature of jealousy and envy, that feeling of lacking and wanting what someone else has, is not new. It is at the heart of the passage we will look at today in David's life. If you haven't been with us, we started looking at the life of David on the first Sunday of January. We'll do that through the week before Palm Sunday. And so what we know right now is that Saul is the king of Israel. He became king. We've mentioned it sort of on the side, but he became king because he was taller than everyone else and he looked like the king. So he becomes king. But the first thing that we looked at in the series was that David, the shepherd, who his father did not really consider important enough to bring to the dinner when the prophet of God shows up, is the exact one that God has called and anointed. And so David eventually comes. He is anointed king, but he is not ruling as king. Saul is still ruling as king. Last week, we saw a passage that pretty much everyone knows, right? David and Goliath. David defeats Goliath. The victory saves Israel. It knocks back the Philistines, doesn't wipe them out, but a significant victory. And Saul, the one who should have fought the giant, right? The guy who's head and shoulders taller than everyone else in Egypt, who should have fought Goliath, doesn't, sends the young man David to do it instead, offers a reward of wealth and his daughter in marriage to whoever defeats Goliath. And it is with that we pick up chapter 18. Now, I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to read through the entire chapter. I'm going to talk to you about, after that I'll explain why we do that, and we'll go through the passage from there. So chapter 18 of 1 Samuel is where we are. If you don't have a Bible, there are Bibles on the ends of the benches. If you don't own a Bible, you can take that with you. Let that be a gift from us to you today. Because honestly, if you don't have a Bible in your house to read, I would love for you to take one today. I would never be upset about having to order new Bibles for church, all right? Unless people are like stealing them and reselling them, but I don't think they have that much of a resale value. Right, you can just call it Gideon's. But anyways, so 1 Samuel 18, we're going to go all the way through the chapter, so stick with me. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. So that Saul sent him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang with one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded it twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence, and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter, Miriam. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I and who are my relatives? My father's clan in Israel, and I should be son-in-law to the king." But at the time when Miriam, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the for a wife. That's a hard one. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And Saul commanded the servants, speak to David in private, and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David, and David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation? And the servants said of Saul, told him, thus and so did David speak. Then Saul said, thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price, except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so his name might be highly esteemed. All right, so what do we do with that, right? So some of you are like, whoa, all right, that's in the Bible. It is. So the reason I read the whole thing is because there's what is properly in English class called an inclusio, what I refer to as bookends. All right, it is a bookend structure. So at the front bookend, we have Jonathan and David's relationship. And at the back of the bookend, so that's verses 1 through 5, at the back of the bookend, we have Saul and Michelle's relationship. So Jonathan and David covenant with one another, verses 1 through 5, and then Michelle, Saul's daughter, loves and marries David at the end, which leaves this big chunk of verses 6 through 27 in the middle of Saul. And how do we characterize Saul in this passage? He is a jealous man. So in between the bookends, properly called the inclusio, those of you nerds who want me to be proper in my English here, the middle of the bookends is what the author is trying to point us to. The structure is meant to focus us on the center. Right? We have the intro, got the center of the story, and then we have the resolution. That center is what he wants us to focus on, so that's where we will focus. In fact, just to keep you on your toes, we're going to start in the middle, and we're going to go to the beginning and then the end. All right? So we'll start with Saul. If you're a note taker, we are going through David's in-laws today. So the first in-law is the father-in-law, Saul. The middle section, verses 6 through 27, shows us how he relates to him. Verses 6 through 9 introduces the problem. What's the problem? The problem is David is becoming popular. David defeats Goliath. Therefore, the women of Israel sing his praises, right? David kills his 10,000s, which is a bit of a hyperbole. He will eventually kill the 10,000s. It's a bit of a prophecy, actually. But right now, he's just killed one really, really big guy. Saul has killed his thousands. So from what we know, in the larger story, this is a bit of exaggeration, but it shows something. It shows us who is getting the most praise. And it's easy to see why Saul becomes jealous, right? If you are the king of Israel, but not getting the most praise in Israel, you will become jealous. This passage is meant to tell us what type of king Saul is, but also to show us what the true and better king is supposed to be. Saul is the example of the broken king, of the jealous king, of the fallen king. And in fact, he is supposed to be an example for us, because what we try to do is similar to Saul. Even though we don't have an actual kingdom, we treat things like it is our own kingdom, that we are the one who is ruling and reigning in our lives, that anything that doesn't fit into our kingdom, into the way that we see the world, is then a problem. Because Saul, if he's doing what he's supposed to do, which he isn't, right? Saul is unrepentant. God, through Samuel, several chapters before, chapter 13, rejects Saul. That's why David gets anointed in chapter 16. But here, Saul, if he repented, if he cared about what God cared about, it doesn't matter who's successful. Right? Think about it. Saul is supposed to be God's king on earth. God has provided Saul for his people to rule over them as a surrogate, as a representative of God. And so if Saul's job is to represent God, and supposed to manage God's kingdom as an earthly king, then it doesn't matter who in God's kingdom is successful. All that matters is that God's kingdom is successful, that God's people are cared for, and that God's enemies are done away with. But Saul is operating 100% out of his sinful desires, out of jealousy. In fact, verse 9, look at it. In the ESV, which is what I'm reading from, it says, Saul eyed David from that day on. Saul eyed him. Literally in the Hebrew, it means to have a jealous eye. He had a jealous eye towards David. He's keeping his eye on him, but not like in a, I'm going to watch everything he does, but in a, everything that he does reflects back on me. He is worried about him. And much like Saul, our world is shaped by jealousy. There's been studies that are starting to come out because of all the social media use that we have, showing that for many, many people, Facebook and other forms of social media operate on jealousy. In fact, a study out of Princeton University came out a couple of years ago, and they said this, that as people increase their Facebook usage, they also have increasing feelings of jealousy. That the platform of social media, specifically Facebook, but really every other form too, is built on the feeling of jealousy. It starts out wanting relationships, but it turns into a comparison game. Is my family as good as the other families? In fact, you even see people try to reject this now and post not perfect photos of their family. Like, look, my child is having a terrible day. It's not always perfect. Because our instinct is to only share the good things, right? Because we want to share the happy times, right? When my son is laying on the ground crying because he can't open his new car because he has not fulfilled the requirements for which he gets the new car. My children love these little Pixar cars. They're ridiculous. That's all they care about. And so this is how we get them to achieve new behavioral standards or learn the alphabet, is you get a new car. And they love it. But if they don't get to open it, they will lie on the ground crying. But I don't post pictures of them lying on the ground crying because that's not going to make anyone very, very happy, right? So we want to share the good things, but what happens is when everyone shares good things, we start to play the comparison game. Are my kids as well behaved as their kids? Am I as good of a parent? Is my Instagram feed as interesting as other people? Do I have as many followers as that person over there? Social media, because what it does is reflect our sinful nature, it starts to play on that jealousy. And the deeper we go into it, the more we become jealous. We see other things that other people have and we want them. That is the nature of our hearts. Because in our nature, it's funny, things really haven't changed. What we say is, I don't really trust that what God has given me is good enough. Which is the same thing that Satan tempted Eve with in the garden. Did you notice that? Did God really say that you can't eat from that tree? Did God really say that? Did God really want what's best for you? Or maybe you should try this. Maybe you do deserve this. That heart has not changed. That's the heart of social media. It's the heart of consuming things. It's the heart of advertising. That your life is not quite good enough as God has given it. So you need what that other person has. And that's where Saul is. That is, Saul is locked into that jealousy. that David is getting the praise that I deserve. I'm king, not David. I deserve his praise. I deserve all the praise, all the glory. Saul's actions start to reflect it. He throws a spear at him twice, just to pin him to the wall, not meaning any harm. That's sarcastic. He's trying to kill David, and what is just a hint in this chapter, in the next chapter, is an outright attempt at David's life. So he can't get the praise, and throwing a spear at him is not quite working. Apparently David is quite nimble. So he hatches a plan. He has a daughter that David wants to marry. Right? Who doesn't want to be son-in-law to the king? It's a good place to be. Royalty. But to get a wife in this day and time required what this passage calls a bride price or a dowry, which meant that you would pay the father of the bride a certain sum to have his daughter as the wife, and the daughter of a king would certainly come at a high price. And David tells us he doesn't have a lot of money. He's a shepherd. Right? He's got some of his father's sheep, but that's about it. At this point, he's in Saul's service, playing the lyre most of the time. So what can he do? So Saul decides, let me use David for my gain. Right? Let's see, how can I use him? He hatches the plan. Now, no, we're going to get to a story about David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba's husband is named Uriah. There are hints in this story that's going to point us towards that story. Because he says, if he goes and he wins, then I get good because my enemies are dying. The Philistines are dying. My kingdom will improve. What would be even better is if David falls by the Philistines. He sends him out to kill 100 Philistines in hopes that David will die in the process. Then the jealousy goes away. Saul is doing what people even try to do today. He's trying to use a relationship for his own benefit. He sees David, he's jealous of him, so I'm going to get as much out of him as I possibly can. Now, his is a little bit more evil than us, right? We use it in more subtle ways of using people. But he thinks either my enemies are going to die, or David's going to die. Either he's going to help me, or I will be rid of him. So Saul's jealousy drives him. But David is successful. He brings back twice the number, which just makes Saul more jealous. In the next chapters that follow, Saul's jealousy is going to shape all of David's life. Saul's jealousy will drive David to the wilderness, drive him to caves, it will drive him to do crazy things. But thankfully, Saul is not his only in-law, because the bookends are actually, at least at this stage of his story, good in-laws. Look at Jonathan, verses 1 through 5. Earlier in 1 Samuel, Jonathan has a very improbable victory. He rushes up the side of a cliff with one of their guys, surprises the enemy, and defeats them. Jonathan is Saul's son. He is someone who has been victorious in battle. And if he is the firstborn son of Saul, what does his future look like? He is the heir to the kingdom. Yes, he is the future king. Right? One day, when Queen Elizabeth of England dies, Prince Charles will be king because he is the eldest. Right? So Jonathan is that heir. He was the heir to the throne. Which means if Saul is jealous of David, Jonathan should be jealous of David too. Right? Jonathan has already won a significant battle, and now David is out here winning battles. Jonathan is heir to the throne, and David is the anointed king. Now, Jonathan doesn't know that yet. The only people that know that right now are God, Samuel, and David's family. Verse 1 tells us about them. It says that Jonathan loves David. He could have seen him as a threat, like Saul does. He could have been jealous, but instead he loves. It says that their souls, that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. There are some who will argue for a homosexual relationship here. We have no context for that for several reasons. One, that's not the way that the word love here is used. Two, one, it just simply sexualizes a relationship that does not need to be sexualized. In a hypersexualized culture, the natural thing is to say, oh, love here must be sexualized, but that's not what is happening. And probably more importantly, it ignores the biblical imperative to love others as we love ourselves, which is the exact description of Jonathan. Did you see it? Jonathan loved him as his own soul, which is the command first given in Leviticus 19, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That is repeated by Jesus and Paul and the Apostle John. Jonathan is an example of how to love your neighbor and possibly even to love your enemy as you love yourself. Jonathan is an example for us as Christians for how we are to see each other, and care for one another, and love one another. The depth of his love and commitment to David is shown in verse 3. It says that he made a covenant with him because he loved him as his own soul. Look at verse 4. And Jonathan stripped himself of his robe and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword and bow and belt. This is a big deal because robes are a symbol of stature. They signify a position. What is happening here is symbolically, Jonathan doesn't know it yet, although later on he will affirm it. He is saying, you get my place. You are a prince. You are the future king. I will not hold on to my robe that shows my position in the family. If you remember back to a different robe, Joseph, the robe of many colors given to him by his father, it symbolized the favor, the position in the family that Jacob had bestowed upon Joseph. It made the other brothers jealous. Here, instead of being jealous for his own robe, Jonathan gives it. He gives it to David. He's giving it away to the future king. He's giving away his position, and he is foreshadowing the relationships that will follow. I want to spend a minute here on verse 3. He says that he covenanted with him. We don't typically covenant these days, right? There are a few times that we covenant in our lives, but not often. It's not a common thing for you to just covenant with someone. So what does it mean? Covenant is not just a promise, although that's probably the closest thing we can think of in our culture. It's not a pinky swear. Instead, it is putting yourself under an obligation. So typically, in the Old Testament, God is the one covenanting. He covenants with Noah, he covenants with Abraham, he covenants with Moses. He will covenant with David in a little bit. And what he does in those covenants is he says, I will act in a certain way towards you. I will do certain things for you. It's the way that God demonstrates his care. It's the way that God demonstrates his everlasting nature. And here the covenant between two people means that they're placing themselves under obligation to do what is best for the other. To bring good in each other's lives, even if it comes at a personal cost. We'll see very soon in our next chapter, we're going to skip chapter 19 and go to chapter 20 next week, that Jonathan puts himself at risk to protect David, that he will hold the covenant true. We'll see several weeks down the road that David upholds his end of the covenant too. That at a possible price or even a certain cost to themselves, they will love and seek and care for one another's good more than themselves. And so from this day forward, Jonathan and David are tied together. They're an example of friendship, of mutual love, of brotherly affection. And they're an example for us as Christians for how we are to relate to one another. The last in-law was actually his wife, Michelle. Now, we don't get a whole lot from her. All we hear is that she loves him, which is pretty good for an arranged marriage, yes? Right? There's plenty of other arranged marriages in Scripture. There's plenty of arranged marriages, probably even in the world today, where people are not 100% excited about it. Michelle seems to be very happy. She loves David. It also means that David is firmly in Saul's family. This is going to shape the chapters that follow. But what she really shows is the success that God has given to David. She is a symbol of that success because Saul thinks he has gotten rid of David. 100 Philistines. Go kill them, and you can have my daughter. It's a pretty good way to get rid of a son-in-law. Right? Imagine calling your future father-in-law, asking for your wife, and he says, yes, I just need you to kill these 100 people for me. Then I will give you my blessing. Right? I'm not much of a fighter, so I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. David survives. He kills twice as many. He has success. That is the theme of the entire chapter. In verse 5, it tells us that David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. In verse 14, it says that David had success in all of his undertakings. In verse 15, it says that Saul saw David's success. He was jealous. And in verse 30, after Michal is given to him as a wife, it says that he has more success than all the servants of Saul. That relationship is a symbol of the success that David is having. The word for success in Hebrew is sakal. It literally means to be prosperous. Right? So I could stand up here and give you a sermon on how you will be prosperous in all that you do if you simply trust and follow God. But, is that true? And the answer is yes, but not in the way that we always hear it, right? The prosperity gospel will tell you that if you follow God, typically if you give some money to this pastor or this church, then all of your endeavors will bring success, will bring good, you'll become rich, you'll become healthy, strong, you'll get six-pack abs, right? Well, if you just help me get this new jet. But prosperity is not primarily financial. And in fact, the word for prosperity here, sakal, is used several times. I want to show you a couple of them. Proverbs 10:19 says this: when there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. That word for wise there is sakal, prosperous, successful. The successful person is wise. They have the discernment of God with their words. In Proverbs 21, it's used as well. Proverbs 21:11 says, when the scoffer is punished, the naive become wise. But when the wise is instructed, sakal, instructed, he receives knowledge. So the sakal person isn't just wise, they are also teachable. So prosperity, as defined in this passage, success as defined in this passage, is not financial. It's not positional, because David's not king. In fact, if David is successful, you and I probably do not want this type of success in our lives. That our father-in-law is trying to get us killed because we are successful. Right? That's not prosperous. Right? Like I'll take a worse job. I'll go scrub toilets if it means that my father-in-law is not trying to kill me. This is not the prosperity that we hear about today. Because prosperity is not about financial or positional or health success. It is about being successful in what matters most to God. It's about being wise, about living as God lives, about being teachable. And success for David is success in service. In service to his father-in-law who is jealous and trying to kill him. Sakal, success, prosperity in this chapter is the one who lives by the Spirit. That's the contrast. Did you see it? Saul, the Spirit has left him, and in his evil spirit, in his sinful nature, he wants to kill. He is jealous. David, living by the Spirit, is successful, is prosperous in his serving an unfit king. So what do we do with this jealousy? Saul is jealous because he lives by the selfish and jealous emotions of sin. What do we do with jealousy? Well, the religious person, the legalist, would say that jealousy is something we need to control. Maybe it's something I need to fast from. Maybe it's something I need to get rid of. I need to show that I am more holy and more righteous than the other person. Saul is not the religious person here. If he was religious, he would seek to show that he is better than David in his performance. Oftentimes in the church, the legalist person will show their jealousy by tearing down, by having gossip and slander towards someone else as to raise their own stature. In the world around us, jealousy is fairly well tolerated. In fact, the relativist would say jealousy is fine as long as it doesn't get in the way of your other goals. In fact, you can use other people for whatever gain you can get from them as long as you don't really harm them. And when they're beyond gain, you just let them go. Cut them out of your life. Don't let that worry you. That is how Saul operates. Now, Saul's a little bit worse than the relativist who would just say, once they're not useful, cut them out of your life. He means literally to kill him, to cut him out of his life. But the gospel is different. The gospel says that we are jealous and sinful because that's what our human nature does. That our greatest desires in this world, things like money and success, position, health, prosperity, are not truly our greatest need. That our greatest need is salvation. Our greatest need is to be under the King, the good, true King, Jesus. And if we are under the good, true King Jesus, who though he was perfect, gave up his position, who though he is the rightful and true King, became nothing, then how much more those of us who have been saved by his death can we see the success of those around us and celebrate it? Because we know the brokenness of our world. The people around us are not something to gain from, but someone to share the true best gain that can be had, the substitutionary death of Christ. Saul is an evil, selfish, jealous, and sinful king. And when we read this text and we see this type of king, we need to recognize that in our lives, we try to rule and reign in this way. Hopefully not all the time. Hopefully not trying to kill other people. We're not quite this bad. Right? So it'd be easy to dismiss this and say, Andy, I'm not as bad as Saul. I'm not trying to kill my in-laws. But if we're honest, we try to rule our own world. We become jealous of those who are taking away from our rule and reign. And what we must do is submit to the true King, the true and better David, Jesus, who came, who died for us on the cross, that true prosperity can be achieved, true right standing with God, good standing in a kingdom where the king does not seek harm, but seeks only good. It is our job to trust and submit to that king. If you're here, you're not a Christian, that's it. Trust and submit to the good king. The king who, though he stood in heaven, came down as a child, who lived a perfect life and then died on a Roman cross for you and for me. Not because we showed ourselves to be successful like David, but because we showed ourselves to be jealous, sinful people like Saul who needed to be saved. Trust in him. And once you trust in him, live like Jonathan. Jonathan is our example here. First, you be humble. Jonathan could easily dismiss David. Doesn't have a place in my household. He's not the son of the king. Instead, he gives up his robe, symbolically giving up his position for David. He covenants with each other. That's why we practice covenant membership here at Waypoint. We covenant. We promise to live in such a way with one another as to seek what is best for one another. That is why churches do covenants today. It's the example of people like Jonathan and David who covenant to seek what is best for one another, whose example exists that you and I in the church today can seek what is best for one another. So if you're here, you're not a member, if you're interested, put it on the connection card, I'll talk to you about it. Membership is how God has designed his church to work. Because the church is the body of Christ. The body is made up of many members. And lastly, David is an example for us as well. Because of how he achieves his success. He achieves his success because he lives by the Spirit, which means we need to look at success differently. Right? Even in this passage, you can sort of see the different worldviews, right? Saul, The king, who is living according to the sinful nature, who is living according to jealousy, sees other people as threats. So he keeps his eyes on them. His worldview as who around me is a threat, who around me can I use. David sees the world as God sees it. He lives according to the Spirit, and God brings success. How? By serving. By serving others, by caring for others, by serving an unrighteous king. He was Sakal. He was a servant who was successful because he was wise and discerning, as the Proverbs say. He was teachable, as the Proverbs say. And one day he will become king. And he will have a choice to live by the Spirit or to live according to his sinful nature. David is given to us as an example. He's given to us as a picture of the true and better king who will come. And David is not going to be the perfect king. But we can thank God that there is a perfect king who came, who was a servant of all. Though he could have been jealous for everything, because he deserves everything. But I think about that for a second. It would be perfectly fine for Jesus to have come to earth and been jealous for all the praise and all the glory and all the honor while he was on earth because he deserves it. But he didn't. He became a servant. Philippians 2 tells us he became a servant, giving up everything for us to die on a cross. That if we trust in him, we will be a part of his kingdom. Let's pray. Father, as we consider this story, as we consider the jealousy of Saul, the love of Jonathan and Michelle, the success of David, we pray that you would help us to reject the world around us that tells us to see everything else as a threat, to live in longing for things that don't truly matter, that we would reject those things and instead care only about the type of success that your word talks about being right with you through your Son, about living a good life of wisdom and success by serving, caring for one another. Pray this all in Jesus' name, by the Spirit's power.